Welcome Exiles to the final update on the Boneshatter Juggernaut. Now, this behind me is going to be Awakener 5 Cirrus, I believe, and it's the first one of the league for us, and so I just wanted to give you guys a showcase so that way you could have an idea, based on the gear I'm going to show you today, how well you can expect to perform if you get similar gear as well. It's decent on the gear, but ultimately, the reason this is the final update is because I felt the damage was lacking too much to do harder endgame fights like Uber Elder and Uber Atziri. I do believe we could take this to do Elder and Shaper because those are relatively easy fights to manage if you've practiced them. I think you could do it. If you haven't practiced them, it would maybe be a little bit on the rougher side given those mechanics you might not know. You might get hit by some hard-hitting mechanics that are usually easy to dodge with practice. It's really a matter of if you had practice, you probably could do it. If you don't have practice, maybe it'd be rough type of thing. Specifically, the reason I don't think this has the damage is because we're roughly sitting around what I believe is 1 million. Somebody in my stream plugged it into PoE and said I was around 1.8 million without any buffs, and then maybe with like Diamond Flask and a few other things I was at 2.5. I don't see it. When I was fighting these bosses, it felt like a lot less than 2 million. It felt like I was 1 million, 700, 800, 900k range, given how long some of these fights took. So I don't know, maybe PoE is wrong, maybe I'm delusional, who knows? Point is, part of the reason I'm ending it here is I don't believe it's going to be able to convincingly kill the endgame content, and I feel like I'm going to be throwing my head against the wall, getting a little bit frustrated with slower boss fights, and I'm ultimately also very excited about playing Explosive Concoction. So it's a mixture of those things, and that's why I'm kind of calling it quits here for the build, unfortunately. I'm sorry guys, I'm not going to continue updating on it. I will give recommendations about gear I would recommend if this is one of the only builds you're going to play the league, how to min-max it, how to take it to the next level, because there is going to be things that come on the market that don't currently exist, like synthesized items with percent strength implicits. Those are a huge boost to where you can take builds these days. Crafting good rares is a huge boost to where you can take builds. Stuff like that. We'll be able to take this build a lot past what it is now. There's certain things that will enable it to have a lot of growth that it doesn't have currently, but we're not going to have access to those, being it's still currently very early league, and ultimately if we wanted to force those things into the build, we'd have to spend pretty much everything we own to try to create those things or find the first versions of those things that exist, whereas maybe later on, as the league progresses, they'll start to accumulate and become into existence, so to speak. So that's kind of the rundown of my feelings toward the builds. Ultimately, it was good at doing white maps, really clean. Yellow maps, really clean. Early red maps, it was doing just fine. I switched into an Abyssus, and the damage was nice, don't get me wrong, but ultimately I underestimated how much I would hate vulnerability maps. Once I switched into that Abyssus, the vulnerability maps really start to hurt a lot more, and our sustain was a lot lower. Given the Abyssus made it so we weren't tanking the trauma charges as successfully, it would make the trauma charges start to cut down on our sustain rather than actually helping us sustain. So it was a two-pronged problem that I basically accepted, all because I was too greedy for the power. I couldn't resist it. So ultimately, things like Abyssus I won't end up recommending after having played with it for a day in red tier maps, rippy maps. It just was too tilting. It was too frustrating to die to things like bleed because we're wearing Abyssus when previously I wasn't dying to bleed. Stuff like that got to me. I gotta be honest with you, it did wear down my enjoyment of the build, and ultimately led to me being like, I'm ready to move on, I'm ready to play the next build. So that's part of the things we're looking at here. That kind of covers my general synopsis and feeling towards the build. I would like to apologize to you guys because I feel like this is not up to par for what I believe is a really good league start. So I feel like if you follow the build, I feel bad because I would have wanted to have given you guys a build that could do Uber Atziri, that could do Uber Elder, and this just really can't without a decent amount more investment. But that's anything you play. You put more investment, you can make a build do anything. It's to some extent, not conversion trap, but you know, other builds you could maybe push things that normally wouldn't be able to do it. So I'm just sorry about that. Sorry I let you guys down. Hopefully my next build I will not be letting you guys down. It will be more fleshed out, it'll be more damage, and hopefully an even funner experience, and that's going to be Explosive Concoction, which I will be working on. And I'm not going to do a update video every day for that build. I'll probably just post one finalized build guide on it, fully fleshed out video type of thing. And I would have posted a fully fleshed out video guide on this character, but because I was ultimately disappointed with its performance, I'm just going to leave you guys with this update video, a bunch of recommendations on gear upgrades and stuff like that. And I'm not going to end up making a fully fleshed out video because I don't want to say, hey, I recommend this, because I don't. I think it was subpar for what I believe is a good league start. It got to white maps, it cruised through white maps, cruised through yellow maps, but it hit too much of a damage wall, and I really think a league start should be able to do Uber Elder, Uber Atziri on a budget, and this unfortunately didn't. So sorry about that. We still were able to do Sears 5, still should be able to do Shaper, still should be able to do Elder, and hopefully it was not too expensive so you guys don't feel so like you're so invested and so in the hole that you can't afford to reroll or do other builds you might be interested in. And even then, maybe you still enjoy the builds, and hopefully I'm not dampening your moods too much, because maybe this could still be a good build for you if you've I don't know, maybe your other builds in the past have been bad in comparison, and maybe I'm just have a jaded perspective because I'm thinking about past builds I've done where they've succeeded well. For example, my cast on Crit Inquisitor last league that I league started, it crushed through content. It felt really good, and whereas this one hasn't felt so good. So that's kind of where my frame of mind is. So that was the series. Hopefully you guys got a good perspective on the damage of the build when you're looking at what I'm going to show you today. Now let's go in game. I'll show you the current gear, I'll show you the certain setup, and then I'm going to go on to give you recommendations on improvements you could make, as well as gear choices I liked and didn't like, etc. So see you there. All right, now that we're in game, let's go over the changes we made today. So I'm going to preface this with a lot of this is building around, my current setup is built around Abyssus, and I do not end up recommending it because I felt it was too painful to wear in the high damage mod maps. In yellows, in whites, you probably can put this on and it just lets you help. It helps you just one-shot packs harder, stuff like that. It probably feels fine. So I would say use at your own risk, but ultimately I don't recommend it because I think it's too tilting to play with. I would end up recommending a rare helmet instead. Part of the gear changes we made today were to a lot of items, actually. We changed our gloves, we changed our rings, we changed our belt, and we changed our chest piece. So to start them off with, Cyclopean Coil. This belt will get cheaper and cheaper, and it will get better and better in terms of bang for your buck, because as it gets cheaper, there's just more winning there. Currently, it's maybe too expensive at 30C. Maybe it's worth it if you're getting into red maps or you're tired of getting frozen, because Cyclopean Coil, it gives us attributes and it gives us immunity to freeze and immunity to ignite. So those are two nice quality of life survival things. It gives us a lot of value there, and that's why we're using it. After that, our rings, we started to try to get a little bit better rings that had both good life, good strength, and decent resistances. I think I paid maybe 10C per each of these rings. I kind of just shopped around using PoE trade till I found something decent, and that's what I was going for. Ultimately, our build isn't great on Chaos Res. In a min-maxed, higher-end version, you still probably want to prioritize getting more Chaos Res than -19. I have noticed this league, poisons from monsters feel way worse. I started to roll monster poison on hit, and it feels dangerous. Usually I used to roll that all the time, and monster poison on hit felt like a free mod, and at -19 chaos res for me, it's honestly felt like a dangerous mod. So getting chaos res, getting more than -19 might be starting to be a thing that's somewhat mandatory nowadays. I don't know. But anyways, we prioritize getting, again, good strength, good life, and then some res if we could. And then here on our gloves, we would have liked to have gotten strength, but our resistances were so tight that we couldn't quite manage it. If you go for a rare helmet, you should be able to get both strength on your helmet and your gloves, as well as fixing your reses in both places, as well as not taking extra damage from Abyssus. So there's kind of the trade-off there. You get way more survivability, you get more strength, you can get more damage scaling from your strength from your Pillar of the Caged God. After that, for the Iron Fortress, this is the chest piece we finally switched into, and we're switching into it for the percent block per strength, and right now we have roughly 1200 strength. That's giving us I believe my math is correct, about 24 block. So you'll see the block on our build right now is up to 52%. That's decently respectable. When we pop a Rumis, that gets us to 64. As we stack more strength, and if you go for higher investment, you should be able to get those numbers up to 13, 14, 15, 16, 1700, and you start to look a lot more convincing on how much attacks you can block. You can get closer to a cap on attack block. This feels great for the most part, except when you get hit by spells, because attack block doesn't help with spells, so there's some ups and downs. Mostly it feels like it just makes us tankier, and that's why we ended up going for it. Alternative routes, if you want to go for an alternate route in terms of high investment, you can go the route of getting an astral plate where you craft on flat strength, percent strength, and then the benchcraft percent attribute. That is going to get you more strength than this will, but the sacrifice is you're going to get less life, or not less life, you're going to get less block, so you're trading basically maybe more single target for more defenses. That's kind of the trade-off there. And then for our weapon, we finally got a 6-link pillar, hence why I swapped to the Iron Fortress here out of my 6-link Astral Plate that wasn't very expensive to get going. On our flasks, we also finally got a Rumis Concoction. I would have liked to have gotten, actually no, this was exactly what I wanted, was duration on it. I don't know what I was thinking, but yeah, I wanted duration on the Rumis Concoction, so that way when I popped it during stressful times of popping the league mechanic with a bunch of monsters, it's a decent amount of defenses, helps us keep our block to at a very high extent. Very nice defensive flask. I also wouldn't necessarily want another extra granite flask here. This just happened to be the only flask I had for bleed removal, so I kept it on there. I wouldn't feel like you'd want to stay with granite flasks. There's probably some other utility flasks I'd go with, considering we already have Rumis in the build, and you don't get the benefit from 2 granite flasks, even if you use them at the same time. Only one of the benefits applies, so you'd want a different utility flask here. Quicksilver, diamond flask, quartz flask, I think that's all pretty much similar stuff to what I've had in the build previously, so I'm not going to talk about that too much. Now let's look at passive tree. One of the big changes we made from yesterday was getting cluster jewel setups. Now this is a little bit more of expense. I think we spent around, I want to say 20C for my large, and maybe, I think the medium was 20C2. They weren't too expensive. I went for 2 notables. Obviously, if you want to go high budget, you're going to go for a 3 notable large. That could involve getting something like a Feed the Fury or Martial Prowess, one of the other extra notables instead of just a 2 notable, but I didn't want to put that much budget into it. I just wanted to keep it simple. And for my notables, I went for Graceful Execution and for Martial Mastery. The main important one here was Martial Mastery. It gives 20% attack speed and 20 strength. That's pretty big in my mind for damage. And then I was just going for another useful notable with it. You can go for Martial Prowess, Graceful Execution, and there's some other good ones. Feed the Fury gives attack speed. There's some other good ones out there that I would look at. There's some notables. I'd check them out on PoE for your options. Or just look up jewels with Martial Mastery, 8 passives, and just scroll down till you see extra notables. And on the trade side, it'll tell you what they do. But ultimately, for min-maxing, I would go Graceful Execution, Martial Mastery, and then something like Martial Prowess as your third one, maybe. Those are all pretty good. For our Cluster Jewel, we went for Warning Call and Provocateur. Warning Call because it gives us up to 100% armor, which should be, whenever we trigger it on a boss, should be quite a bit of extra armor scaling for us. And then Provocateur just happened to be the only two notable one on the market, which is decent for crit. But ultimately, I would like to get a lead by example instead for Onslaught for 4 seconds whenever we Warcry. Half the time, uptime on Onslaught I think is better than the crit here. That's kind of up to you, but I think the movement speed from Onslaught would feel better. We also went for a Corrupted Blood Brawn. This makes it so Corrupted Blood, a super annoying affix, or a super annoying deadly mechanic to deal with, not even exists for us. Brawn is a cheap jewel generally, so getting Corrupted Blood on it isn't too expensive. You could also go for Corrupted Blood plus other stats like Corrupted Blood plus attack speed with staves or something like that. You're not going to get a great jewel with Corrupted Blood unless you have a lot of money to spend. You can still get a 1 or 2 stat jewel or a jewel like Brawn for not too expensive. This one cost us, I believe, 40C. There was a 20C on the market, but it was a 4% strength, so I spent a little bit extra to get 6% strength. And then lastly, we added another jewel, which was just life, res, and attack speed. And I think that's pretty similar to our other jewels on the tree. Now, in order to get these passives into the build, I had to sacrifice some passives. One of the sets of passives I sacrificed were Vanquisher. I found out more recently, when I was basically looking at things I could sacrifice, is that Vanquisher actually wasn't getting us much value because the crush debuff doesn't really matter. The reason is bosses like Shaper have like 20k armor, which doesn't do much of anything to mitigate our damage if we're hitting them pretty hard, which we are with physical damage, so we didn't actually need the crush debuff to lower enemies' physical reduction, because the physical reduction didn't matter. In maps that have enemy or monsters have 40% phys reduction, sure, Vanquisher is helpful, but for the most part, it wasn't actually useful. So these were four affixes or 4 passives I spent that actually weren't worth it, and that was a bad execution on my part. I didn't realize how much reducing enemies' phys reduction didn't matter for bosses like Shaper. It's not like elemental damage where you need penetration. It doesn't matter like penetration does. So that was a mistake on my part. We spec'd out of those nodes. We also dropped our crit accuracy nodes because we were going to be getting some crit accuracy and attack speed here. And I dropped a couple endurance nodes here, and maybe a couple life nodes. That was the main nodes I dropped in order to get these passives in here. It takes about 14 passives to fill out the 3 nodes to get the large cluster, the rest of the cluster here, and 1 medium. Another big change that we tried out that I'm not gonna recommend ultimately, I'm kind of, it's very in between for me, is I switched back out of blood magic to get a high level clarity. This made mana problems non-existent, because I could still constantly swing, constantly attack due to the clarity regeneration, but the trade-off was we lost sockets to do so. Adding back in vitality, back in precision, back in clarity, they have their benefits of getting extra accuracy, extra life regen from vitality and stuff, but that's another 3 sockets we lose. And I think I would rather have the totem setup we had before with Ancestral Warcry, Ancestral Protector, Maim, and Multi-Totem. So that way we could get the damage buffs from the totems, get Maim on enemies, because currently we don't have Maim, and that's a decent damage boost, along with Ancestral Protector's a decent damage boost, and I don't feel like it was worth it. We also technically did get in a Blood and Sand, I believe, somewhere, for about 10%, 13% more AoE damage, or 13% more AoE. But again, I think I would rather have the totems. It's a hard choice for me to make. I could go kind of either way. I will have the POB to this setup in the description below, so you can try it if you want to. Kind of up to you. But I think I'm leaning towards blood magic. It could go either way. Part of my issue with this is also when I was doing... Oh, I just unallocated. I'm going to put back on Blood and Sand. But part of my issue was I'd be constantly attacking, and then I couldn't control when I cast my Immortal Call because I don't have mana until I wait a little bit. And once I wait a little bit, I can cast it. So there'd be scenarios where I'd be fighting monsters. I would want to cast it, but I can't because we're dealing with such a low mana pool because I wanted to try to fit in Blood and Sand. So that's kind of the reasoning behind those changes, that I didn't necessarily like them. I tried them out. I think they were decent. It could go either way, ultimately. I would say that comes down to personal preference. I'll have the tree for the current version down below, and that is what that is. Now, talking about min-maxing or upgrades to make in the future, say you want to upgrade this past what it is now, you want to actually min-max this strength stacker and take it to where it can go. First off, synthesized items. For both your glove slot and your amulet slot, your best in slot, in my opinion, is going to be, and actually this goes for rings too, items with % increased strength. And crafting those items with the strength essences until you also get additional good mods like life, like resistances. That is going to help take your strength numbers to the next level. There are strength stackers you can get much higher than 1200. This is a low investment and high investment. You can definitely push 2000 plus. I'm pretty positive that I've done it before, and it involves getting synthesized items with % strength implicits. That's one big huge upgrade you can make, and it applies to each one of these gear slots. Both your rings, your amulet, and your belt, and your gloves. Technically, you can also do this with your belt slot, but keep in mind, you're going to want to figure out how to deal with freeze and chill and ignite, or freeze and ignite elsewhere if you choose to upgrade out of your Cyclopean Coil to a high crafted belt, because you can get some pretty insane crafts on your belt. That's up to you if you want to invest that much more. Also, for your helmet, if you want to min-max your helmet slot, there is a mod on PoEDB. You can look it up on PoEDB, but there is an elevated influence mod that gives you % crit chance per strength. And that is the mod I'd recommend going for. You probably want to awaken it with another solid mod, or try to get that mod with flat strength itself. Something along those lines would be the type of helmet I would go for, because you can scale a good amount of crit because of all your strength scaling, along with scaling more strength in your helmet slot as well. So things like that to look forward to or look into upgrading to would be, of course, a good option. As always, if there's any gems that have awakened versions of them that we can replace our supports with, those would be good to look into as well. And now that reminds me, I'm going to quick pause and sidestep this discussion about upgrades, because I almost forgot to cover, we swapped out of Impaler. Now, somebody pointed out in the comments of my last video that our Impaler is getting bricked by our totems. I didn't even think about this, I didn't realize this, but that is happening. If your totems hit the boss and they inflict a weak Impale, we've just lost all the value of our good Impale we could have, and therefore Impaler we can't use. So we ended up unspecking Impaler and grabbing Impale support instead of the endurance charge on stun. That's one of the changes we made. It was a sad one, but it was one we needed to make because Impaler was getting bricked by our totems. So just wanted to say that real quick, and that is that. Back to the elevated, or the min-maxing extent of the build. Awakened gems, those are things you want to look into. Alternate qualities, for example, alternate quality Boneshatter, you can get, I believe it's 1% attack speed per trauma. That is pretty high damage. I would look into that. Another alternate quality I would look into, or not alternate quality, enchant I would look into, is the one that gives you a 24% chance to gain an additional trauma. I believe this should be viable on a non-Abyssus version of the build to stack quite a bit of trauma and get a lot of damage multiplier and still work out fine. I think that is the play. So that goes into a lot of the items where we're wearing gear investment. Technically, you maybe can upgrade out of Alberons with some some really well crafted influence boots, because you can craft on % strength, you can craft on flat strength, and you can get life and better movement speed. That should be available as well. Keep that in mind. You probably want that on a 2-stone base so you can get additional res there as well. So upgrades to make on your gear slots, I think that covers the majority of them. In those cases, you maybe can also consider, if you really want to just hard lean into the strength stacking, is going for the astral plate with the influence space. This is all sorts of things which you're going to do is if you are going for min-maxing on a higher budget. Attribute stacking is one of those builds where every additional investment starts to feel better and better, I would say, but it comes at a cost and it's not cheap in my opinion. Also, upgrades I would make is getting a lethal pride. You can put a lethal pride probably right here is where I'd recommend it. And lethal prides make other notables have additional modifiers to them. And the important modifier we care about is a lethal pride can make random notables have 5% strength. The possibilities are 5% strength, 5%, 5%, 5%. That would be like the perfect lethal pride. I don't think this is very likely. I would shoot for at least 10% strength and maybe one other useful thing like 20 flat strength or intimidate or % life. There's a lot of useful affixes you can get on a lethal pride. Simply just divine your lethal pride jewels, and every time you get a different number, socket it in and see if you get better affixes than you did the last time. That's how lethal prides work. That's a big upgrade as well. Another change I made is I went and I got Diamond Skid, and I replaced it from the Adamant. I am being told they're going to change flask ailments, so that way we probably can solve bleed with our flask and not be too big of an issue, especially if we're dropping Abyssus, bleeds aren't much of an issue, in which case Adamantium doesn't feel like that great in comparison to Diamond Skin, because Diamond Skin just gives us so much more res and pretty much the same amount of armor, if not more consistently. So that's another change we made there. I think this should cover the vast majority of changes. Oh, also, another min-maxing thing is I would look into a split personality, perhaps one that has flat strength, flat life, or flat strength, flat accuracy, or flat strength, flat armor. check into those. Maybe they could be decent. There is a little bit of travel going all the way to this cluster. Maybe it could be some good value, something to consider. Anyways, that will conclude, I think, all the possible main recommendations I would do for upgrading and min-maxing the what you can out of this build. Other things in min-maxing could be just going in PoB and checking if these were actually the right damage supports. It's something I don't like to do. I don't like to just go into PoB and have it tell me what damage support's the right one. So there's a chance we made some wrong choices here in terms of our supports. Very possible. So you can always check that. That could help you squeeze some more DPS out of the build. And that's probably my last speck of advice about the build. Ultimately, it did do well up until red maps, but red maps it started to feel iffy. The damage started to be too low. We started to die because we were using Abyssus. I have mixed feelings about the build. I'm glad I played it off League Start. I enjoyed the crunch, the satisfying pops of going around popping packs, but unfortunately it did fall short of what my goals and the bar I set for what I think is a good build, and I'm sorry about that. So, hopefully you guys still were able to enjoy the build, or you're still enjoying the build, but I am sorry to you if you're expecting me to keep going with it. I just don't think I can. I've gotten a little bit disappointed with it, and that just is what it is. Part of Path of Exile for me is cycling to new builds when they aren't being fun anymore, or when you've just completed the things you wanted to complete with them. And I think I've taken it to the extent I want to, and I'm ready to play another build, Explosive Concoction. I am very excited about. I want to make a good build for you guys with that, and I'm going to try to do better. We'll see. I'm going to make a full build guide on that. We're going to go hard in the paint, and we're going to make a better build than this. That's the plan. Anyways, I appreciate you guys all watching the video. Thanks for your time, and have an excellent rest of your day. Peace out, Exiles.